Thank you for staying in with us right here on Morning Express on this Wednesday, the 29th of April, 2015. Well, it's time for us now to get to the newsroom. And the newsroom is where we look at how we've been doing our job as journalists. And we in the Fourth Estate, have we performed as we should? Are we writing the right stories? Are we asking the correct questions? Are there stones that we're leaving unturned? Especially in Kenya, that's a term that we've had many times. No stone will be left unturned. So we become the watchdog for the people to ensure that those stones are turned. So are we doing that? That's what we're going to be looking at here this morning. And let me just start first of all by introducing the panel that is here with me, and I'll start with the ladies first. We have Nancy Booker, who is a lecturer at the Multimedia University. Thank you for joining us, Nancy.
Thank you, Michael.
We also have Clay Muganda, features editor, Standard.
Oh, thanks.
Karibu sana.
Ladies first, eh?
Ladies first.
Oh, okay.
I started with a lady.
Oh, okay.
We also have John Allen Namu, who is a special projects editor right here with us at KTN. Thank you for coming, John.
Morning.
Last but not least, we have Patrick Gadara, who is a communications expert and also a cartoonist. I've been following your cartoons on The Nation lately.
Yeah, they've been causing a bit of a furore.
Is that what they're meant to do?
Well, I hope so, yeah.
Essentially.
Essentially, that's what.
Okay, essentially. All right, let's start off our debate today, or our discussion, with corruption. And this is something that we have covered a lot, especially in the recent maybe 2 months or so, with the list of shame coming up. And there's been a lot, surrounding corruption. And we as journalists, of course, have been very happy to do that. However, there's been also the tables being turned, and we have one incident especially where we have an anchor and a few journalists who apparently were money exchange hands for a story to be killed, for a story to literally just not see the light of day. And although that is still being investigated, I'd love to hear what your comments are on that. And maybe let me start with you, Clay. This time it's not ladies first.
I think we talked about this last week. And it's sad. It's sad that actually these guys are, or rather, this journalists or news anchors are being accused of having accepted a bribe. It's quite difficult to actually understand, corruption in the media, because we would not cover it per se. This is a situation where no media house actually reported this. It was reported by the blogs. Yeah, and actually I think we are picking it up from the blogs. We are not even sure. We keep on saying that they're under suspension, investigations are still going on. And it's I don't know that it's this whole society that actually this corruption thing, it's just all over the place. But it's quite sad that actually these guys were caught. Not that they should not be caught. Not that they should not be caught, but it's so deep rooted. Because probably what you're talking about here is we're talking about people who probably received money or whatever it is to kill stories. But if we look at bribery in a larger sense of the word, I think this is something that most journalists, actually, even when we go for junkets, 90% of the junkets Kenyan journalists attend, they don't pay for them. Our media houses don't pay. So I don't know if that one also falls under bribery. Because, I keep on saying, I say this privately and as a joke, sometimes like 95% or probably 100% of Kenyans who've been to South Africa in the last 4 or 5, 6 months cannot tell you the price of the air ticket, because they don't know. They never paid. And most of the time we travel out of the country, our tickets are paid for. So if that falls under bribery, then I think we're in trouble. We are bribed almost every day.
Nancy, do you feel we need to draw the line? There are some which are evidently not acceptable. For instance, if this be true, that they received money to make sure that a story does not air, that would definitely be against any moral standard that we can come with, whether you're a journalist or whatever profession you're in. However, just like Clay mentions, there are those times a journalist, for instance, is sponsored to go do a story by, let's just take an example, maybe an MCA sponsors and says, look, I've got a project that I'm doing. At what point does a journalist draw the line and say, I cannot do that? Because how will you report objectively when your ticket is being paid by this person?
Thank you, Michael. I think let me just speak up from where Clay left, and it's unfortunate that we're not seeing that story being covered by the mainstream media.
Correct.
Because if we are supposed to be checking society, I think we should also be, and we are journalists of integrity. When we have gone wrong, we should be ready to admit that yes, we went wrong in this instance. Most of the updates that have been coming forth are, on blogs. I know one of the media houses had a discussion around it, earlier in the week. But I think we do not have an authentic source of information regarding that particular story.
Do you think because it's within our profession, we are probably downplaying it and hiding?
I mean, that would be speculating. I wouldn't know why it hasn't been covered. We would expect that kind of coverage should be out there, because if we are saying that we are covering corruption and we are naming and shaming, and yet we are part of the accused when it comes to corruption or the allegations of that kind of nature, then I think mainstream media houses should be able to take that up also and say, this has not been right. But having said that, the moment, the whole question of moral responsibility and the practice of journalism, that when you're compromised, and the question of where to draw the line and where not to, I think it's clear that the moment you're paid, or your transport is paid, or your accommodation is paid, there is some level of compromise that is likely to come in. Are you able to stay above board? Are you able to remain objective, remain fair, even after that has happened? And there are very many instances where we see journalists being compromised as a result of receiving bribes or receiving favors or receiving facilitation, whatever it is that we want to call it, to be able to pursue a story, which raises certain questions for us in media, within media houses. To what extent are the media houses supporting journalists to be able to do some of these stories? Right. Because some of them are costly. I know we'll be talking about the story, that the investigative piece by John Allen and Mohammed. There is a cost implication. Are we ready, to pay for that, as compared to, the fast food journalism where you go and get a story and it's out there? That some of these stories that then make a difference and set one media house apart from the other have a cost implication to them. And are we willing to support journalists to pursue that? Because if we don't, then we find a lot of interference, coming in from corporate institutions, from advertisers, to compromise the kind of coverage that, that we then see at the end of the day.
Okay.
And for the public who have trusted media as one of the most trusted institutions, then it casts aspersions on the credibility of the various stories that we are getting. And the question is, to what extent can I believe the rest of the coverage that we've been receiving? To what extent have journalists been compromised in the kind of reporting that we have seen over the last...
All right. I'll come to you, John Allen, because I know you've done very many investigative pieces, and possibly you could share with us your experience. Maybe there are times you've come across people that really want that story not to run, whether they're going to pay or even threaten, sometimes maybe your life. One is, what's your experience? And secondly, what damage potentially does this do to our credibility as journalists?
Well, let me start with your second question. In terms of credibility, it's fairly clear that as soon as you are paid or received some sort of inducement to do or not do a story, then your objectivity is called into question, and that's the credibility of the facts are called into question. And I think that's what we need to think about when we're talking about the Kenyan context, especially in reference to Clay's statement. Are we in a system that allows us to do free, independent, fair, balanced journalism that would not require the support of some of the institutions that have supported very many journalistic efforts in the past? And I'm trying to be as PC as possible. Because there have been some very great stories that have come off of the support of NGOs and that sort of thing to do these kinds of stories. But then again, I almost single-handedly blame that close relationship between politics and journalism, especially in the counties, but more so now in the front row of political coverage. That close relationship between politics and journalism for the way we cover politics today in this country. And I'll say it here, and I stand to be corrected. I don't think it's credible. I don't think that for the most part, a lot of the coverage that we have in the political space, in business, in sports, even in investigative journalism, some of it is not credible, is not above board. And we need to be honest with ourselves as journalists if we are going to be able to ever clear this rot away. To your first question about whether we faced
incidences
where we're either being paid to kill a story, yes. Where we're being threatened to kill a story, yes. But the question is, how committed are we as journalists and as editors and as a management to support the fact and support free and independent journalism? Nancy talked about whether we can support free and independent journalism in this country and whether it's structurally it's built that way. I don't think it is. Again, I think our businesses, the business of media has not been, there has been no introspection to the extent of looking at what drives people towards our brands. Is it the advertising? Is it the journalism? If it's the journalism, why aren't we investing in the journalism and then looking for ways to be able to support it, either through advertising or those kinds of things? I don't think we're thinking hard enough about it. I know it'll take some very, very hard questions to be asked of the structure of our financing. How much money do we get from the government, for instance, in terms of advertising revenue? Those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves today if tomorrow we want to look at our profession and say, you know what, we are proud of the people who are out there and the people who are supporting, because we know these media houses, to the last penny, support free and independent journalism.
Okay. Patrick, has the hunter become the hunted? And since we have the power of the pen and the power of the camera, are we keeping some of these stories away from the public because it is us?
Oh, Gaddafi,
well,
so
I mean,
happy.
No, I mean, it is clear that the media chooses which scenes to highlight, and mostly when it comes to itself, lots of our press chooses not to say are the things that are wrong within newsrooms. You know, this is not the first time you're having allegations of reporters being bribed, you know, of even your senior editors, you know, behaving badly, confronting, for example, the EACC, you know, threatening them, etc. These stories were there and were ignored roundly by the entire press corps. You know, so I'm not really surprised that in this case that also they're not really going after it, and that we are sort of talking, we're dancing around the facts. You know,
no, we're talking about it now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at the language you're using. Oh, some media house, some journalists. You know, the blogs are out there. They publish names, you know, and stuff. But we dance around it. You know, and my question here is, why are we talking about it here? Where is the story about it? You know, from our mainstream press. Has anybody called this media house, called these journalists, found out, well, actually, why you suspended, weren't you? You know, what is your side of the story? You know, even the politician, again, you see the terms we're using, you know. The name is out there, nobody calls it.
So what would you suggest as the way forward?
So my suggestion is actually we need to be writing stories, pursuing the allegations of corruption within the media, just as much as we pursue them outside. You know, so it's not just a matter of celebrating that it's, you know, when the politicians look bad, you know, but also when it affects us. That we are willing to look inside, introspect, and clear out, as I think John Allen said, clear out the rot from within. You know, otherwise, I think our own credibility, you know, as watchdogs, if you will,
Is at stake.
We're sure to hell, yeah.
Okay. Clay, do you feel...
Let me just add a point to what Gadara says. What happens in this country is that we don't have journalists who write about the media. I mean, if at all we had...
David Macaulay attempted to.
Yeah, he had that, which actually was also funded by an outside, I think another, either Ford Foundation, I'm not very sure, or another NGO. But the problem is we don't have journalists who write about the media, because in other places, when we have those people who write about the media, probably then we would be writing about ourselves. We don't cover ourselves as much. Having said that, the thing is, when I said something about junkets and all that, most of the time, like right now, we don't have a Kenyan journalist. We keep on saying we're a regional superpower or whatever it is. We don't have a Kenyan journalist covering xenophobia in South Africa, because South African tourism has not sponsored any. I mean, if at all it was Big Brother Africa, Cape Town Jazz Festival, whatever it is.
So are we compromised because we've not invested enough in...
No, I think it's also because the media houses, or rather the management, has never seen the need, because these people, the sponsors, I mean, they give us the date. So most of the time, you go to your bosses and say, like, I have this trip to South Africa, I have this trip to Mozambique, I have this trip to wherever. The only thing you probably get is a per diem. Then nobody asks you, like, who is funding the trip, or where is the air ticket coming from? And this is something that, I mean, it happens not even for international trips, even for local trips. Like sometimes, and this is something I've been trying to talk to, especially my writers or the correspondents, is that come to me, I'll sign for you. If you want to go somewhere, come to me first. If you have a story idea, let me sign for you. Go there and let the bosses refuse. Then we'll sort it from there. But don't decide, first of all, that, okay, fine, this particular hotel is taking me to this particular place. If you have a story idea, come sell it to me. If it's good enough, I'll sign for you per diem and even accommodation cost. I keep on telling them that. You see?
Okay.
Could I just add on to something that Clay has raised, that in as much as we do not have journalists who cover media per se, I think in this instance it's a social ill that we are talking about regarding other institutions, and you know, we need to create that space where there are journalists who cover media. But when it is an issue of national concern, such as corruption, then we may not necessarily require that journalist to talk about it. That in the same weight that we are talking about corruption, you know, in government, you know, agencies, in all other sectors, that we should be able to do that. But he raises something that's really important. Interestingly, when you look at some of the successful productions, even talking about radio, for example, when you look at the coastal region, the radio is a very powerful medium there. You know, they listen to it a lot, and there are very good development stories that emanate, you know, from the coastal region that run on these radio stations. But the truth of the matter is that those media houses or those stories are not sponsored by the particular media houses. That oftentimes, you know, donor agencies are the ones that are sponsoring, you know, these journalists to go out and do those development stories, you know. And so it raises, you know, the whole question of support. And I like what John said, that when you look at media in this country, the support, the business model under which media operates in this country does not seem to have the space or dedicated resources to be able to support, you know, coverage of news. We understand that the newsroom is one of the most expensive departments within a media organization. Now, with that, you know, there comes certain obligations from media houses to be able to support them, because the moment somebody is paying your way, in whatever form, you're going to be compromised.
You're going to be compromised. Okay. As much as before we go to Play for Profit with John, but you've mentioned that we need people that are covering, you know, the media. Isn't this covering media? Aren't we doing that already? We also have a program, I think, on NTV Press Pass, which purely just talks about media.
Yes, I mean, there have been, let's say, strides towards that, but I don't really think that this constitutes comprehensive coverage of how our media operates. But I think one thing I'd like to throw in here is also the role of the blogs, who have, for a long time, sort of been painted as not a very constructive part of the media landscape. But we are seeing them also performing a role where they keep in check what the mainstream press is doing. There's lots that's written in the blogs that is atrocious. I mean, I'd be the first to admit this. But there's also quite a lot that we're seeing now them breaking in especially in areas where mainstream press is afraid or unwilling to go. That there are lots of these things are now happening on the online space in blogs and stuff. But we also have other channels through which media can be held to account. It would be good, I think, for our press to take cognizance of this and to start learning some of the lessons from those platforms that they could apply to their own organizations.
Okay. All right, let's move on to another story, and that's Plague for Profit, a documentary or an expose that ran right here on KTN. And John Allen Namu, of course, this being your brainchild or baby. Question, first of all, is what was the objective?
Well, the objective, quite simply, was to tell this story. Tell a story that for close to a decade was not being told comprehensively enough. There had been attempts, and I need to give credit to the East African and the nation in this respect, that there had been some coverage of what was happening in Owino Uhuru about the effects of lead poisoning. But the facts were mostly, and I guess this carries over from the discussion we were just having, the facts were mostly presented to them by people who had done their own investigations, right? They weren't independently established. But that's no skin off their back. I mean, they tried, yeah. But what we wanted to do with Plague for Profit and Futari Asumu was to tell the story and tell it comprehensively enough that so that people would see that this was an actual problem happening within the confines of the Kenyan state. That there would be this nexus between business and industry and corruption that is literally causing death. That connection, that parallel is often drawn in very broad strokes between corruption at the borders, for instance, when we're talking about Al-Shabaab and terrorism. And many people see that in that context, in that there is some connection. But here there is a direct connection in that when the people who are developing this factory were told by environmental impact assessment experts and by lead experts, heavy metal experts, that this factory, the way it was constituted, would cause certain health effects to the immediate surrounding community, they went ahead. That was willful ignorance of fact that led directly to death. And we wanted to establish that even after the factory was closed in 2014, not as some politicians and NEMA and all of these other people are saying that it was closed years ago. No, last year, all right? Even after it was closed, the health effects, the negative health effects that accrue from lead are still with that community. And then the final thing that we wanted to do was pose a question to Kenyans themselves. Is this how low we have sunk? That the value of human life, wherever it is, whoever it is that we are valuing, that the value of human life would be sold for a pittance, you know, and we'd gladly place profit over anything else. That is a truism of our country, and that is something that we wanted to express through that story. And of course, at the bottom of this is a story. A story about lives of people who have been affected in ways that we can't even imagine.
Okay, do you feel like that objective has been met?
Somewhat, yes. I think that now that people are talking about this story, that people know what is happening or what has happened in Owino Uhuru, that there is some introspection at some level in the public space about what is it that has happened in Kenya that would allow for these kinds of things to take place. It is an outrage, not just in terms of the kind of negative health effects that have accrued to that community, but it is also a moral outrage, and it is time for us to take a step back and think about the direction in which we are going. Think about the direct correlation between our own willful ignorance of the negative effects of our own actions to other people. Let's think about how badly corruption affects us and who exactly it is affecting. Because today it is Owino Uhuru. tomorrow is going to be some middle class estate somewhere, and the next day it's going to be someone else. Not to say that we should look at this from a classist approach, but we really should think of each other as people living within a country that deserve the same rights, the same benefits, and to breathe the same free air as everybody else.
Absolutely. All right, Clay, given that this factory has been running for decades, and I'm sure there are probably other stories that need to be highlighted like this one, why do you think it took so long for the story to come up?
First of all, I think that was a wonderful story. I mean, now that we're talking about the media, there's a certain media house that actually wants to take the credit away from you guys that they ran the story in 2014. I don't know whether they're watching, but I just need to remind them that actually KTN did that story in 2012. Yeah. So wherever you are, I mean, it was a wonderful story, and I think we need that kind of stories. I mean, it's that kind of stories about. Not politics all the time. It was more or less like something that talks about the social ills. What annoys me, or what I find quite odd, is that even now there's some people who actually still, as it was being said, that the thing operates. Sometimes you go there at night and you find that it's still operating. I think this thing ran for all this time because when it comes to safety, we put very little emphasis on safety in this country. We do not see it as something like, that's why even the environmental impact assessment report was probably ignored until probably that young lady Phyllis, I think, started feeling like, okay, fine, she needs probably to take these guys to court. That's when these people started taking this thing serious. But it all speaks about the level of corruption. It actually permeated the whole society, that even some of the people there who realized that they were dying, their lives could be bought by probably 2 or 3 tablets of the so-called calcium. They could not raise like a finger and say like, no, this thing is killing us, or this thing is killing our other brothers. And then I don't want to put it to say that it's because of poverty. Because poverty, I mean, very many institutions, especially state institutions, try to inculcate a culture of poverty in Kenyans, in as much as, okay, if you don't work there, you won't get a job somewhere else. So these guys had to do that because they had to keep on working there, because probably you're poor, because if you stop working there, you'll continue being poor. So let me gain now, even if I die after 5 years, but I'll have made money now.
Let me make my money now.
Let me make my money now.
Okay.
And I think poverty will be an excuse. I think the explanation here is it's the level of corruption, the way this thing ran for this long, because of the level of corruption. Because even when you try to talk to those Indians, I mean, one of them refused to talk to you. I mean, I know these guys, it's very easy for them to try to buy their way around most of the time. Some of them will try to buy their way around. Yeah. So when they get somebody who is willing, they do it very easily. And I think that is exactly what happened. That's why this factory ran for so long.
Okay, we've mentioned 2 things there. There's corruption and there's also the cost issue. And Nancy, do you feel like we're in a catch-22, given a story like this obviously costs in terms of time? The journalists would probably have to, do a lot of work behind the scenes. Secondly, fly left, right, and center, trying to piece the story together. And secondly, earlier on we talked about, NGOs and people who fund this particular. So are we in a catch-22? Are we going to be able to get our heads out and say, look, we can do an objective story because we've invested enough?
Thank you. I think before I answer the question, let me just make a commentary regarding that story and to answer to something that John raised. In terms of bringing that conversation to the table, yes, we are now having that conversation. I think the story has been brought to a point where it's part of the national agenda. Kenyans are talking about it. And the most fundamental question out there is, where next? Who do I trust? And are we safe as a country? The enemy seems to be within, not out there. I think
Walls won't help us.
we have spent so much time, imagining that the enemy is out there. I think the enemy is within, and if our systems are not in place, then we are likely to see a lot of that unfold. But the question of whether we are in a catch-22 situation, I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that for you to be able to have the patience and the stamina to run such a story means that you are not looking for immediate gratification as a journalist. And so it calls for a more seasoned journalist, somebody who's comfortable in their skin, to know that this is what it's going to cost me. You know, lots of sleepless nights, I think, lots of time, lots of resources, lots of tears. Maybe they don't talk about it, but you know, sometimes when you're covering some of these things, there's also an emotional angle to it, which your non-seasoned journalist would not have the patience to do. I would rather chase a politician and come back, he said, she said, and then tomorrow find out what, you know, the other person has to
how
say.
much money is going to pay
and
me.
how much is going to pay. You know, so you'd need to have, you know, very seasoned journalists to be able to unearth some of these investigative pieces. And the question is, as media houses, what are we doing to motivate these seasoned journalists to stay within media houses? Because we usually say that the ceiling is very low in media. You get to a certain point and there is no longer motivation for some of those seasoned journalists to continue working within media houses. They get into teaching, like myself, or they get into the corporate world, you know, because there is
Like
very
Kadara.
like Kadara.
That was coming.
You look for an exit strategy very early because the system has actually forced you to do that. That there is also a lot of interference that comes with some of these stories. Death threats, for example, or threats on your life, and maybe, you know, John has been a victim of that. Do you have what it takes? And the motivation to be able to do these stories then really has to be more of a personal drive rather than the system or the media houses supporting you to do that. Because if it was media house, if you relied on media houses or the media institutions to support you, we would not be seeing these stories coming out.
Okay, Patrick Gadara. NEMA have come out and, you know, have sort of tried to do something about this, but the government so far has been mum. Have we done enough?
NEMA is government.
But NEMA is government.
Yes, I mean, I think I saw a piece where NEMA have now raided the factory.
Oh, and they've put a statement in the paper today.
But my question is, again, I mean, one of the things that stood out for me about the documentary was that throughout, all the government officials who were being interviewed kept claiming ignorance. Or we didn't know. What is really their job then, if they didn't know? And I think one of the things that I think we need to do as we follow up on what John did, they did a great job. But there needs to be now follow-up, and we need to start assigning blame. I know in our discussions these days, everybody says have solutions, don't point fingers. You know, and it is really an argument for impunity. It's really an argument for a lack of accountability. People are paid to do certain jobs that they did not do, you know, and they need to be held to account. Otherwise, it will keep happening. The other thing is not really a criticism of what Alan did, but I think we should expand the scope of our discussion. We are not the first country where these lead problems have happened. How did others handle it? You know, and not just from the point of view of alleviating the problems that are already in the ground, you know, but also in terms of the systems they have to stop this sort of stuff occurring in the first place. So we need to be learning also from other jurisdictions, from other countries that have faced the same problems. You know, finally, I will say that I think we as a country need to really introspect about what has been revealed by this, especially in the roles that are assigned to people. And John talks of the value that we place on life, but actually it's on particular certain lives that are seen to be disposable. If that factory was set up in Kileleshwa, I can bet you it would be closed in a day.
3 days.
You know?
Yeah.
But there are certain places where we think life is cheap, that those lives aren't really worth as much as lives of people elsewhere.
Can I just jump in there and talk about that? In fact, it raises a point that we tried to raise in the story, I think, that is getting lost. Owino Uhuru had been there prior to the setting up of this factory. Now, that space was designated as an export processing zone, right, where factories, industries will come, and in essence, an industrial zone. When you ask the question about why it is then that, despite the fact that there was this community still living there, why wasn't there an effort even to try and take them somewhere else prior to the setting up of this factory? Nobody has an answer for that. They'll say, okay, no, we should have the Department of Occupational Health and Safety, or Public Health, or NEMA should have done this, or the EPZ should have rezoned the area, or the municipal council should have known. But you go there and you see people living there. You know, it's not like these people are figments of your imagination every time you go and do an EIA. Those people are there. And it speaks to what your own internal values are as a person within an institution like that. You know that there is a community there. As an individual, you have seen it, you have probably even spoken to some of the people there. Why didn't you say, you know what, this factory should have been set up as guided by the World Health Organization at the time, 50 kilometers away from any living population? Or the kind of internal mechanisms in that factory should have been set up in such a way that it would minimize the damage to the community out there. There was a question that we asked the public health officer, and he was like, you know, we wanted to stop the factory. We realized that there were health.
What was the question?
The question was that if you knew, because he says that he knew, if you knew that that lead has such negative effects to the community there, why didn't you just say no, stop the factory from operating? And he was like, okay, by the time I came in, I've never seen an environmental impact assessment, which I think is a lie. Right, because
but he's a public health guy.
There was a multi-agency task force that was set up to look into that factory. That includes public health. So, as an officer, if he did not know, it was because he didn't read. All right, it's not because he
in ignorance.
Yeah,
but
you can't be in ignorance
but
about
this is the thing I'm saying. I was pointing to, and the reluctance for people to assign blame. You know, the fact is, we are now being bandied about. You know, NEMA saying, "Oh no, actually it's a public health issue. It's public health that should deal with it." Other guys saying, "No, actually it's the county government that should deal with it." We are not establishing who are the people, you know, who are in charge. What is the role of a county health officer? You know, and what was her role in this? You know, where was the failing? And then assign that to somebody, make sure somebody is held accountable. That's how you prevent the next guy from simply coming and saying, "I didn't know."
But there's so many Winohurus actually in this country.
The writer to that, the guy's answer to that question was that we knew that there were negative health effects, but you see, if we went out and told these people that there'd be pushback from those industries, that should not be the concern of a public health officer. The purview of whether there's pushback from an industry that has been licensed to operate should fall with the export processing zone, should fall with Kenya Revenue Authority, with the people who actually gave the people the license, with NEMA. But as a public health officer, your first interest is public health.
Absolutely. All right, before we move on to the next subject, yes, very briefly.
Let me just comment. This is an ongoing story. I think we have seen a lot of reaction, follow-ups. You know, people are now coming up. I think we saw NEMA now acting yesterday. Very reactionary. We always wait for things to happen.
As well as a member of parliament.
And as well as a member of parliament.
I rented it out. I didn't know.
Yeah.
If you rented a house out to somebody, and you received complaints from the neighbors that this person was doing certain things in your house, what would your first reaction be?
So that particular story, and I think a couple of others that we have been seeing of late, point to the changing role of journalism, not just in Kenya, but you know, the world over. And Guy Bagger has written an article about, you know, journalists not just doing the traditional roles of being those that provide information, you almost see a sense of journalists now also coming out and playing the activism role.
Well, actually, that's a traditional role of the journalism.
No, that is not really. It's not the traditional role. You know, providing entertainment and information, and you know, it's a changing role. And that role is changing, you know, because the institutions that have been trusted or entrusted to do some of those things are not doing. When I watched that story, I asked myself, okay, so why did the journalists go out and get is it Lancet?
Yeah, Lancet.
You know, to
SGS,
test
yeah.
you know, the soil, to test you know, the residents of that particular area. Points to a failure. Where, you know, I was asking myself, where is civil society here? And that then means that the role of the journalist today is evolving. Which then raises questions, and I think we've debated this before. Where does our work stop? Where does it end?
Correct.
You know, as
Okay.
as media.
And maybe before we move on from that now to the next thing, John, what's the next thing about that story? Is that the end of the story?
No, that isn't the end of the story. I'm glad that especially KTN, because that's where the story was told, is following up this issue, asking the right questions about who needs to be held accountable. Of course, the community there is still living with those negative health effects. I think there has to be a discussion in government around what needs to be done. There's a Senate committee that went there to investigate this. They ordered that the number of people, the ones that NEMA is talking about having been responsible for doing the work, the Senate Health Committee ordered that blood tests be taken of 60 people in Nowino Uhuru and 60 people in Bangladesh, which is nearby, to establish the extent of lead poisoning, to basically do what we did as well. And after that, those tests should be able to direct the government in terms of what to do. But I think this discussion needs to percolate to Parliament, for Parliament to finally develop laws around air quality, around soil quality. We don't have those laws. In an industrializing country, we cannot rely on Dutch laws and the the World Health Organization for our own benefit. I think that's where the discussion needs to
Okay,
go.
but now, given that you as a journalist you've brought the debate and you've brought those things on the table, but what's your responsibility? Does your responsibility in regards to that story end there?
I don't think so. I think to the extent that we've told this story, I think now that it is the public's baby now,
Okay.
and the public needs to be able to discuss this. But I think as journalists, as individual journalists, we need to follow up on what's happening in that community.
What's the ripple effect?
What the ripple effect is. I think that for me is the first place that I'd go.
Okay.
But I mean, it'll take us in.
All right, I want us to move on to another story. I want us to go on to something else because time is not on our
very
side.
quickly, I would also say, I mean, in terms of follow-up, it's very important that the journalists, and not just you, but the journalists are trying to keep the spotlight on what the legislatures are doing, you know, what government is doing, to set up the laws that you've mentioned, etc., and also to hold its own people accountable.
Starting with the MP for that area.
That we need to, we can't just have a situation where people say it's been reported and then we allow it to lapse after a few days or weeks. You know, we stay on it and we stay on those people and ensure that if no action is being taken, that somebody is being pushed, you know, their faces are on TV as the people who are actually failing, you know, etc. So instead of this thing of, well, let's not point fingers.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on now to another story, and on page 9 of the Daily Nation today, Kenyan journalists under threat, group tells UN, and this is in regards to terrorists, you know, the safety of a journalist while they are working. And I want to join this in with page 16, which has beaten journalists to blame for chaos, says CS. Remember the story that we talked about last week, where some journalists were beaten by GSU. The very people who were supposed to protect them came and beat them, were the ones who were beating them up. Now, Clay, what is your take on this, given that journalists now are in the crossfire, they're right in the center?
We don't respect journalists in this country, and I've said this so many times. We don't respect journalists at all. I mean, we see them like, I keep on saying, we are special, you know. I mean, yeah, we are very special people. I mean,
are we special or we just do our job?
No, I mean, we have special powers.
Maybe not us as individuals, but the role that we play is an important one.
Look at what John and Mohammed did. I mean, here is a case where you have a whole government. I mean, you followed up for them the people who are responsible. You conducted for them the tests. You did everything. You tested the blood of the people. You tested the soil quality, the water quality. You almost did everything. You gave them addresses. You went to look for these people. I mean, I liked the bit when Moha said he was walking in the streets of India looking for these people. Anyway, I think coming back to that, and I've always complained about this, I think we need stronger and more powerful media entities in this country, which actually the authorities can take seriously. Right now, that complaint, it was made by, I think, UN or protect journalists,
CPJ.
Yeah, to protect journalists. And locally, we talked about it, our media entities talked about it, and that was the end of it. And I keep on saying this, we don't respect journalists locally, and I think it's because also our media entities do not come out so strongly. Basically, the media entities that we have in this country, one is a trade union. I can never fault them. The other one, and I keep on saying this, I've never known what they do. It's a quasi-government body, MCK. We need a stronger media body that actually, when it speaks about the safety of journalists, or that actually journalists need to be respected, then people speak up. I mean, I find it very odd that actually a whole CS can come out and say, these people had their badges, they had their cameras, even if they don't.
They're to blame.
That they're to blame for being attacked. I had on TV yesterday, I think the police officer saying that they wanted to arrest the animals. These people were not even armed.
Okay, Gathara, who protects the journalist, given that you're here in the crossfire? Now even the CS comes out to say you guys are to blame.
Well, I mean, the role of protecting everybody falls on government. You know, they cannot run away from it. And as we said last week, this is a case where the protectors have turned into the people perpetrating violence against their wards. I think if you look at the scope of it, it's not just what happened there, but also we've seen just in this past week editors being summoned by the DCI for a story they wrote. You know, the K24 crew are being grilled by GSU for writing a story on them for the investigative piece that showed the lapses there. You know, and you've got to ask, when government and the guys who were beaten up had gone there to essentially investigate what the GSU was doing, you know, allegations against the GSU there. So here we have a case where government agencies and officials, when confronted with journalists who are looking into or trying to hold them into account, react by shooting the messenger, not really understanding, okay, these guys are highlighting their problems that we have that we need to sort out, you know, but really going after the journalists for doing their job. You know, so it seems to me that we're in a situation where government simply doesn't want to be held to account, of course, you know, and when it is shown up to be falling short, really goes after the people speaking, you know, against it. We've seen this before, even with civil society, how it deals with civil society. You know, that when people are highlighting its failures, suddenly it's your funding that becomes a problem, that you shouldn't get more than 15% etc. So there is a real story to be told here about the reaction of government to criticism, its aversion to criticism, its reluctance to learn from the mistakes it has made, as we have seen in Garissa, in Westgate, in Paketoni. You know, we need to highlight this, and so it's not really just them going, or it shouldn't be them going after what the press is saying, but actually taking that into account and factoring it into the decisions.
Okay, and John,
yeah, I think we need to rally as journalists right now around each other. I think Clay mentioned an interesting point, that Kenya Union of Journalists essentially is not really serving the interests of journalists. And here we have to fault also our owners who put in contracts that if you join a company, you cannot be unionizable. You understand? That takes away a certain amount of power from a journalist to be able to rally. And then it also makes competition the most important facet of journalism in Kenya today, where rather than rally around a story like the one that we did or the one that Dennis Okari is going to do on Sunday, rather than rally around those facts and support the journalist who is doing that, try and report about this, we see this as a slight against us. The era of the scoop is not as we knew it, and is not as we used to know it, all right? Where a media house would get a scoop and that sort of thing, and then we all celebrate that. No, that's not what journalism is about, and nor should it ever have been, in my own opinion, right? I think we need to be able to find these points, whether it's setting up new forums for journalists to be able to support each other, to follow up on the stories that some journalists can't do, to talk about the beating of these journalists in I believe it was Kilifi, right? Or to talk about Purity Mwambia and Franklin Wambogo,
correct,
who have been accused of certain things. To the extent of whether the accusation is credible or not, we can have that discussion. But if it is harassment, then we need to call it out as what it is, and say that these people in our midst are being harassed for trying to tell a story that would help everybody, right? Let's establish those facts. It is important to establish whether Purity and Franklin actually did wrong, right? And if they did, they should be held to account as individuals. But as a fraternity, what does it do when you will stand aside and let another journalist receive the kind of treatment that someone else is? It really points to a lack of foresight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But also,
Let me just
let me hear from Nancy.
Yeah, let me just add on to that even in talking about that, I think we need to be objective as journalists, and in pointing out some of those ills, we need to point them all out. I think we had in the last 1 month, we've had instances where journalists have not only been beaten, but have also been forced to do things that are contrary to what they're supposed to be doing, and we talked about it here. We did not see that kind of coverage. So if you're going to condemn all this, let's condemn it in its totality. If you're being forced to wear what you shouldn't be wearing just so that you can get a particular story, that should be condemned in the same breath as we are condemning the harassment by police, the harassment by politicians. That should also be condemned, so that you're being paid to kill or to cover certain stories. All those are forms of harassment that need to be brought to bear. And let's not just be focusing on it when it is harassment that's coming from the police. That we need to look at all the other players in this equation. Advertisers are a major influence in terms of what journalists are doing, and there are instances where journalists have been threatened because this is maybe one of the largest advertisers in that particular media house. Do they talk about this? Maybe not. But when it is the police, then we talk about it. I think we need to be objective in terms of pointing out those ills, that we bring out all the institutions that are harassing the work and the performance of journalists, and not just looking at it when it is government or when it is just the police, for example.
Okay, and maybe as we wind up, Bweta la Uhalifu, a story that was supposed to air on K24 but it didn't due to some technicalities which are yet to be sorted out. But how far is too far, Clay, in terms of getting a story? According to this story, they bribed their way into a GSU camp with explosives in their car. How far is too far in terms of getting a story?
Okay, first of all, before I answer that,
very briefly, because we're running out of time.
The bit about not respecting journalists, and this one comes right from the top when they say like gazeti tutasoma alafu whatever nayo nyama tutafunga nayo nyama, but actually you've read it. That's what matters to us. You read it, whatever you do with it afterwards, that's up to you. But you see, the tone, it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. It speaks volumes about, like, come on, whatever you guys do, we don't care, You guys can't, you're such small people. Anyway, when it comes to the extent somebody can go to get a story, The whole thing that they wanted to expose was the rot, how easy it is to do that.
But do you use an illegal way to do it?
But what is the legal way?
What is illegal?
What is the legal way? What is the legal way?
And the fact that they had explosives without
What is the legal way? I mean, this is not something. This is not new. I think as early as 90s, I used to see stories which actually the British, the Sun did, where actually they managed to get through to the airport using fake uniforms, fake police uniforms, and managed to get into the flight and all that. It's not something new. There is no law against that, because what you're actually trying to expose is how easy it is to get to the country's biggest military installation with explosives.
Right.
Probably what you can say is maybe they should have used maybe something like fake, something that probably would look like an explosive but is not a real explosive, because first of all the first question would be, how did they get the explosives in the first place? I remember one time, I mean, if you allow me, that there's a gentleman, a crime reporter, who used to tell the group managing editor that I can get a gun for 5,000 bob. I can get a gun, give me the money. So one day he was given the money, the following morning he brought a gun to the office.
Okay.
The group managing editor could not believe it.
Yeah.
He called the police immediately. He did not even touch the gun. He called the police immediately
All right.
to come take the gun.
We need to wind up. John, your comments on how far is too far?
Well, to the extent that you would carry something that could actually endanger your life and the life of others in telling a story, I think that is too far. I think that was a mistake. And
If it's true
if
that
it
they
is-
had
if it
the
is
real explosives.
If they really did have those explosives, I think that is too far. To the extent that we're trying to explore the weaknesses in our paramilitary institutions, I think that's something that needs to happen, but within certain boundaries. I really can't speak to the facts of the story because I don't know them. But I'll say this: what Clay was mentioning about how we do certain things in this profession, undercover journalism, which essentially is what I think this story is pointing at, is a very controversial part of our profession. If they needed to have asked themselves certain questions, if without misrepresenting themselves, they would still have been able to get the same information. Was it necessary to misrepresent themselves? If they can answer to the affirmative, then going undercover has some credence in that respect.
All right, I think we'll just have to wind it up right there. And let me take this opportunity to thank you all. Clay Muganda, Features Editor Standard. We have John Allen Namu, Special Projects Editor. Nancy Buka, Lecturer, Multimedia University. And Patrick Adhara, who is a Communications Expert. Thank you very much for being part of our panel today. Well, that's where we
bring back our Sophia.
That's where we wind up our news.